This is 0612 TV.
Welcome aboard.
Hello YouTube, and welcome to another image editing tutorial on 0612 TV. The object of today's tutorial is to create a lomography style photograph from any image. You don't need special software to follow along with this tutorial. Any common program like Adobe Photoshop or the GIMP will suffice. Before we can begin with anything, you'll first need to obtain your image. I can't help you with that one, but you can search Flickr if you like. That's where I got the image we'll be working with today. If you'd like to get at the same image, take a look in the video description for the link. The first step to editing will be overall correction. Any undesirable effects or coloration should be removed at this point. This is of course dependent on the image you've chosen. As for this picture we're working with, you can see it's quite washed out and the colors don't really stand out. Using the brightness and contrast tool, I'll first lower the brightness and then increase the contrast. Notice how the colors of the image jump right out at you. We could take this further by entering the hue and saturation setting and increasing the saturation slightly. The change is subtle, but you can see the colors are brighter and more vivid. The second step will be to crop the image. Lomography pictures are normally squarish in shape, so bear that in mind when you carry out the crop. For a more stylized look, apply the rule of thirds. First, define a subject in a picture. The simplest and most straightforward way to frame this subject is to place it in the center of the frame, but a rule of thirds provides a slightly different approach to doing this. Imagine dividing an image into 9 equal parts by drawing 2 evenly spaced horizontal lines and 2 evenly spaced vertical lines. Instead of positioning your subject at the center of the frame, place it where any of the lines intersect. Biasing the point of attention like this is the essence behind the rule of thirds. Once you're satisfied with the cropping of the image, we proceed to the next step, which is also the most crucial: colorizing the image. Lomography images are characterized by their off-color tones. This is the result of a film development technique called cross-processing, where a certain type of film is developed in a solution designed for a different type of film. To reproduce this effect digitally, we'll use a function called color balance. This allows you to change the proportion of color in the image. You can do so separately for the darkest, lightest, and mid-tone areas of the image. First, go to the shadows and bias the colors drastically, any way you like. At this point of time, your image should look horrible. Don't worry about that, here's where the magic happens. Go over to the highlights and bias the colors equally drastically, except in the opposite direction. You can go back to the shadow setting to refer to what you've set. The idea is to counteract the settings in the shadows by using the highlights. Notice now that much of the colors look pretty much normal, but the image as a whole is slightly discolored. This is the effect we're trying to achieve. Feel free to tweak this to further bias the color to your heart's content. Remember not to neglect the mid-tone setting. Also, the preserve luminosity setting can let you create even more drastic results. Explore and inject your own style. For this image, I pushed the shadows towards cyan and blue, the highlights towards red and yellow. For a little bit more of an orangey sepia look, I pushed the midtones slightly towards green and about halfway towards red. And that's it for this step. We've almost gotten our lomography look, but the color is way too even. Remember, it's traditionally ruined film, and you want to add a bit of weirdness to the color tone as well. Create a new layer and set its blending style to overlay. Now select the gradient tool, choose any built-in gradient, and give the image a quick swipe. Notice how the image is discolored in patches according to the gradient. Depending on what gradient you've chosen, as well as the actual image itself, the results may or may not be satisfactory. Experiment with different gradient presets, and try other gradient shapes such as radial or square. You can also tweak the opacity of your gradient layer if you prefer the effect to be more subtle. You can add more layers with gradients if you're so inclined to. Now, cameras used to capture lomography pictures do not necessarily need to have well-fitting lens. This may cause the image to have a characteristic darkening around the edges, also known as a vignette. To achieve this effect, create a new layer. Pick up the gradient tool and choose the foreground to transparent preset. Set a gradient shape to radial and increase the offset somewhat. You may need to reverse the gradient so that transparent comes first. Begin the gradient from the center and drag it towards the edges of the image. Notice how this darkens the corners of the image somewhat. This is the effect we want. You may want to redo this step to cover more or less of the corners. We are pretty much done, but there is one more step I normally like to do, and that is to add a little bit of frame to the image. You'll need to modify the canvas size to create a bit more space around the sides of the image, and a bit more additional space at the bottom like so. Create a new layer above all the original image layers and fill it with a paper-like texture. Using the selection tool, turn on the rounded corner setting. Select a region in the shape of the image layers below and press delete. You should cut a hole right through the paper layer, showing the image through a rounded corner rectangle. We could add a little depth to this by selecting the outside layer and creating a drop shadow for it. Remember to trim down the canvas if it's extended by the shadow. You want a highly blurred shadow, and you can turn down its opacity a little. That's pretty much all there is. I have the habit of giving my lomography style images a finishing touch by writing something in the corner. Of course, to do this, you'll need a graphics tablet. I'm using the Wacom Bamboo with Jim's inking tool to sign my name in the corner of the frame. And there you have it, a lomography effect tutorial for you. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. As for now, I'll see you again soon on 0612 TV.